Hello, everybody. Hello. Hello and welcome to the Commissioners panel. I'm Fred from Documentary Campus. This session is produced by ourselves, Documentary Campus, in collaboration with Sheffield DocFest. And I'm delighted to pass you over to our panel of international commissioning editors and our session producer, Christoph Jörg.
Hello. Is this working? Good. Well, let me introduce you this very distinguished panel representing the world of documentaries. Oops, that's not good. We start with Barbara Truyen from VPRO in Holland, Catherine Olsen from CBC in Canada, Tomoko Okutsu from NHK in Japan, Donald Thoms from PBS in America, Washington, Cynthia Kane from Al Jazeera, America, John Godfrey from SBS Australia, and Mark Edwards from Arte France in France. So the panel is actually very easy. We show you clips, we talk about what they're doing. You're free to ask questions whenever you want. And it's more like a little presentation of everybody, and then I ask occasionally some questions, and then you ask questions, and we make it very easy. And we start with Mark Edwards from Arte France. You don't have to get up. You just can sit there, and it's not very, just, and he can, yes. You want to get up and do a lecture?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So your department is in charge of 6 different slots.
That's right.
Can you explain a little bit what these slots are and how does it work?
Sure. So the way that Arte is set up, I think most of you know that Arte is broadcast simultaneously in France and Germany. In France, we produce about 40% of the programming for Arte, and there are 3 documentary departments in Paris. And I'm at the one called Société and Culture, which is actually kind of a misnomer because we also do a lot of current affairs, history, and investigation. So the 6 slots we're feeding are, Monday night there's a slot called the Lucarne, which is for quite experimental films, essays. It's a long tradition of films that question how you film things. And that's commissioned by Luciano Rigolini, who's been at with the group for a long time. A lot of festival films there. Tuesday night is the night that we feed the most strands for. The first part of the evening is an investigative strand that's 90 minutes. And I'll show you an example of that quickly. The second part is a history strand, and the third part is a geopolitics strand. But that Tuesday night gives us the possibility of doing 3 history programs or 2 history programs and an investigative program. We have a lot of flexibility on Tuesday nights.
I think you can say it's pretty unique in the world to have like one evening only with documentaries.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think we're trying to do the best documentaries we can do, long-form pieces that are dealing with sometimes news issues, sometimes recent current events issues, but with a real documentary tradition. So we're actually in a place, Christoph and I have talked about this quite a bit, where we're dealing with material that's often treated by other news departments and other channels, and so there's some bleed between newsy topics and historical topics that we can treat in the same evening on Tuesday nights. Wednesday, there's a culture strand that does mostly literature, history of ideas, and cinema. And Friday, there's a social issue strand that's mostly verité, observational documentaries. Let me show a clip of an investigative piece that was very successful for us. To give you an idea of the field, that's really the sort of showcase strand for us. Tuesday night, 90-minute prime times. So the clip is film called Sand Wars, which you've seen a lot of, I think, in clips here.
Kept beaches closed and caused severe erosion on the Gold Coast. Reporter Amber Austin Wright joins us.
Summer, from coast to coast, the sand is disappearing at an alarming pace. Our chief environmental
70% of the beaches are washing away. That's the findings of a joint study.
This is a very real issue for dozens of communities across the region's coastline. And just to give you some idea of how serious it is, look at these pictures which present...
Well, that decade-long study provides a pretty startling picture, and scientists hope policymakers take action before it's too late.
Government has rejected claims that dredging is responsible for the dramatic erosion of Portsea's famous front beach. It says that many locals are unconvinced.
For most of us, sand conjures up images of days at the beach, relaxation, and fun. But that's about it. Once the holiday's over and we're back at the daily grind, sand is hardly worthy of attention. But will it always be there for our vacations? And is beach sand the whole story? Beyond the shoreline, what is the impact of sand on our lives?
This film went around the world. Was anyone co-producing it here around the table or buying it? No? Did you? Oh, okay.
No, it didn't air on PBS.
Yeah, it's PBS America is showing it here in England, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's airing on PBS America tonight or tomorrow night here, if anybody has any time. I think what's interesting to point out here, this is a film that did over 4% of the audience, which is basically doubling our audience share in France. Over 1 million people watched it in France. And what it's doing is it's looking at the global issue of sand, which is not an obvious, easy topic to make attractive. And it's looking at all of the different ways that sand is used in both tech products, construction, roads, and it turns out sand is the biggest commodity bought and sold around the world after water. So the investigation moves around the world to different points in the globe, looks at the sand market, looks at regulation, and then looks at beach erosion and all of the problems that come from beach erosion. The paradox is that there's a lot of sand in the desert, but that sand isn't useful for construction and all of the applications. So what you have is a global investigation that's dealing with huge environmental and economic issues, all sorts of criminal activity and illicit trade, and it just opens up into a very wide question. And I think it's exemplary of the kinds of things we're trying to do, which are, we're living in a time where we're sort of all reeling from huge economic changes and trying to figure out what are the systems that govern our lives. And looking at the hidden systems that govern our lives is one of the main questions that we ask these investigative pieces to do. Looking at all the consequences, the ramifications of these systems. We did a very successful film about Goldman Sachs that looked at how Goldman Sachs was involved in many huge financial dealings around the world, including the refinancing of the Greek debt. And so what happens in these films is that we're revealing information that may be more or less accessible to the public, but we're organizing it in a way that makes the story very compelling, and we're looking for directors and investigative teams that will come in with a real documentary tradition and bring that extra thing that will make it much more than a news program and much deeper than a news program. So that's for investigation. Maybe if there are any questions about investigation, I can answer, or I can move on to the other strands.
Go ahead, yeah. You need a microphone. You have to speak in the microphone each time because this is recorded, I guess. Mine is not working?
1, 2, 1, 2. How much is language important and also a French connection or German?
I think that's a very good question. I think that in general, it's good to have a European connection. It doesn't necessarily need to be French. It's often good to have a French or German piece in the story, but proportionally it can be as little as 10% of the story, and it's not a basic requirement. There are plenty of films that don't talk about France or Germany. I would say the proportion of films that don't talk at all about France or Germany may be 20 or 30%. The language issue in these pieces usually is resolvable. So if you have a proposal that's investigative, that has English narration, obviously we would do a French and German version. If you have a person, a guide who's leading you into the story, who's doing the investigation, that raises other questions where you have a person on screen who's actually doing the inquiry. If there's a lot of talk, that might make us hesitate a bit.
And you had on-screen moderation? I mean, you had people presenting on screen?
It's generally the researcher or the person going out into the field looking for information, looking for interviews. It's never facing camera kind of presentation, but that we did a thing about fiscal evasion. Where the journalist was an expert in all sorts of techniques to avoid corporations not paying taxes, and you have him looking at documents, going into buildings, talking to people, so you see his presence on screen.
Okay.
And in terms of the European connection, does Britain count as Europe?
I don't know for how long, but well, yes.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to talk about, does it work or not? I don't know. I don't hear myself. Yes? Okay, good. You want to talk about other strands, maybe? At Arte France, or Arte in general, do you have documentaries in prime time? So it would be good to talk about that a little bit because it's actually very, very special.
Yeah, I think Arte
these days.
Yeah, I think 40 or 50% of the programming on Arte is original documentaries. In my group, there are 8 of us commissioning films for the 6 strands, and we produce over 100 one-off documentaries a year, plus series, plus some magazine programs. And so we're showing at least 1 or 2 primetime documentaries a week, and we're also trying to sustain a real author, director-driven creative documentary strand and pool of directors. The one thing that has become clear, I've only been at Arte for 2 years. I was an independent producer before that. And what's clear to me is that there are many different kinds of documentaries now at Arte, and there's a real willingness and a genuine openness to look at every different kind of form. And I think one of the things that we try to do is, in making the documentaries maybe more topical and more current events oriented, some of them for these Tuesday night strands, we don't want to throw out the documentary baby with the bathwater. We want to keep a very high standard of what it means to tell a story in a creative documentary form. And I think Arte has a very positive image. I think people feel in France and Germany that they're happy that Arte exists, but I think for quite a long time, and in the last 4 or 5 years, there was a sense that we know what it is, it's there, we don't necessarily have to look at it. And I think one of the things that's happened in the last 2 years is that people have paid a little bit more attention because we've done unexpected things like the sand, things that are slightly coming from an unexpected angle, but are opening up a very big world of ideas and analysis.
Okay. Should we? Do you want to show something else, or do you want to talk about something else? Or?
I can maybe come back to it later.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Barbara, VPRO Holland, you have a very selective documentary strand. How does it work?
Well, there's quite a few big changes in the Netherlands because we used to be 22 broadcasters airing on 3 different channels, and now there's only 8. So we were bound together, and we got rid of all our strand names, all the different broadcasters, and we're all airing now in something that's called 2doc. We're on the second net, and it's called 2doc. So actually, all the commissioning editors and buyers are now flooding into the same slots, which is interesting because you still sort of need to have a public broadcasting signature per broadcaster, that it's clear that I do something else than my colleague, although we're airing in the same slot. This sounds kind of difficult, right? But for us it's actually quite easy, because for the audience it means that on Monday night at 9 o'clock you can always watch a primetime documentary, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you can watch a documentary at 11 and another one, usually a repeat at 12. And these are just the one-offs, and there's plenty of series as well, but I only have to care about the one-offs. And that's very nice.
So how many you do?
I do about,
a year?
Well, I don't really say a year. I've got 65 projects on my slate, and that's always going on. So from early development that we're airing next week, it's always 65 projects. And why is it so many? Because in the Netherlands it takes a very long time to finance films, and they spend a very long time on developing projects. So therefore it means that I'm having always 65 projects on my slate. But we air about 30 of them a year, I think.
How does that work? I mean, you have 30 slots and 65 projects?
Yeah, but
okay.
Well, I mean, we're doing...
You have the budget for 65?
Yeah, well, no, I don't, but I just keep on going.
Oh, okay. Good.
No. The thing is, you can't just say, like, can I have a documentary and can I have it in 2 weeks' time? It takes, I mean, the kind of documentaries that I do, they take 18 months at least to make. So I need to be able to move forward. But they know that, my bosses, and they keep on telling me that I can go on doing this. So I do. And even if I'm not allowed to, I can sort of be stupid blonde to say, oh, really? I didn't know that. But the good thing in the Netherlands is, and that's very luxurious, there's no one I have to go to if I like a documentary, say, can I please commission this documentary? The only one I have to look at is the person in the mirror. So that means that I can also move really fast, and our contracts are 3 pages. So that's very easy to work with us, but we're very selective.
Talk about the selection. I mean, what do you mean by selective?
Well, for example, the clip that I'm going to show in a minute is something that I think is very important. I think our world is becoming less and less tolerant on many issues, and it really surprises me that the world is opening up online, but at the same time it's really making people more conservative than ever. So I've sort of decided that I want to do a lot of documentaries that sort of look at the ethical boundaries, that make people discuss things. And especially on Twitter, there's such a big community going on. In the Netherlands, we're like the highest Twittering country in the world because we love to share our very beautiful opinions all the fucking time. So we're very strong on Twitter, but it also means that I really am looking, I'm quite nervous sometimes when we air things like, how is this going to fall? Is there going to be hysteria? Are they going to burn down the village where this film takes place or not? But I think it's very important to sort of reach for these boundaries. So the film I took with me is not an international film, it's a Dutch film, because I thought you should see this. And it's about sexuality. And I often hear from my international colleagues that they really think they're quite astonishing, the films we do, but they're way too explicit to show. And I think they should do it. So that's why I want to show you this clip. I'm going to introduce it a little bit. It's a film called 69 Love, Sex, Senior, and it's about elderly people and their sex lives. And It's, for example, there's a beautiful couple in there of two people who in the early 70s swapped partners, and they were married to another person, and they absolutely loved having sex with each other. But the partners didn't, so they decided, okay, let's not do this anymore. And then the partners died 20 years later, and like 3 weeks later, they became a couple, and they've got the best sex ever. Or there's this homosexual said, like, I had 2,000 dicks in my life, but I only fell in love for the first time last year. He's 92. And I think these are all beautiful examples of humanity and of normal people, not pornographic people, but people like you and me. So let's show
let's
little
have a
clip.
look. Yeah.
Als je bijvoorbeeld terugdenkt aan toen je bijvoorbeeld 40 of 50 was, wat waren toen je grote seksuele fantasieën?
Heel verschillend. Heel verschillend. Je hebt natuurlijk bepaalde filmsterren die je in je gedachten. En laat de mannen niet denken dat het niet zo is. Maar als je met je eigen partner vrijt, dan denk je ook aan Frank Sinatra of wie dan ook.
Dat houden we geheim dan voor alle mannen.
Dat mogen ze best weten hoor.
Dus je seksuele fantasieën, waren die gekoppeld aan personen?
Ja, vaak wel, ja.
En nu? Zijn die seksuele fantasieën veranderd?
Nee, niet veel. Nee.
Zou je iets kunnen omschrijven?
Nee, ik denk dat ze nog wel gekoppeld zijn aan bepaalde personen, ja.
Maar is dat dan die Frank Sinatra van 30 jaar geleden? Of heb je een nieuwe gevonden? Dat vraag ik me dan af. Is je seksuele fantasie, wordt die ouder met jou?
Nee. Maar dat komt ook. Ik voel mezelf niet ouder. Mijn lijf is wel oud, maar mijn brein niet.
Hoe oud ben je in je brein?
Ik denk dat ik ergens nog in de 50 ben.
Dus daar past makkelijk dan een volwassen Frank Sinatra bij?
Ja hoor.
Neemt die behoefte aan seks af naarmate je ouder wordt of blijft die gelijk?
Neemt niet veel af, nee. Het wordt misschien iets minder, maar niet veel.
En mag ik dan vragen hoe vaak je masturbeert?
Het ligt ook aan hoe je je voelt. Als je prettig voelt, gezond voelt, nou, dan kan je rustig 2-3 keer in de week. Maar als je moe en naar, dan is 1 keer in de week meer dan genoeg.
Ja. Hoe gezonder je was, hoe prettiger
je voelt, hoe prettiger je het ook vindt om eens even lekker klaar te komen.
Ja. Maar de intensiteit van je orgasmes,
die is net zo hevig.
Echt?
Dus het is niet anders dan 40 jaar geleden?
Nee. Het is nou echt, het is helemaal, ja.
Dat is toch ook typisch?
Ja.
Lekker.
Ja hoor.
Dus dat slijt helemaal niet?
Nee.
Nou, oké, maar doe je er dan langer over om klaar te komen?
Ook niet. Dus 2 minuten, 3 minuten, langer duurt het zeker niet. Het is zo gebeurd.
So we aired this film last week, and it at 8:30 in the evening, and I was really curious because when we started this film, we sort of thought like, ooh, older people and sex is going to be, nobody's going to watch that. But actually, we had an audience share of 10%, and what was the best thing? Like the next day, all these elderly people, because they don't use email, right? So they were phoning us. And telling us how much they loved the films. And like at one point, like at 2 in the afternoon, I got this email from the reception saying like, we've counted them now, there's about 115 elderly people who phoned to. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Do you think, I mean, from the panel, that this film could be done in another country than Holland with the same sincerity? Cynthia.
Well, I can tell you that on one of our series, POV or Independent Lens, I know we did do a show about sex among people plus 60. So yeah, I think we did. I'm not quite sure we used the word masturbate on the air, but I think it was something else. But I don't know. I think though we did do it. When I was with Discovery, we did one. So I think we did.
But not at 8:30.
Not quite the same way, I guess.
Not at 8:30.
Not at 8:30 at night in the US.
And I'm curious, and what's the age of your audience?
Well, I mean, our youngest audience is 48. Yeah, and our oldest audience is like, I think, 68 or something. But, I mean, if I look at this, actually, the good thing was that a lot of younger people saw it as well. And they said, like, oh, such a relief to think that you can still have this kind of intense orgasms when you're older. So everybody felt kind of like, great. And actually, what was really great as well, this film went into cinema, and they had this action. You could take your granny or your granddad to the cinema for free. Isn't that amazing?
So this film had a theatrical release before it went on on TV?
And it wasn't very successful, but at least we tried it, yeah.
Is that important for you to select the film, that it has also theatrical?
Well, for me, it's, I mean, if I look at the mixture of things that I do about 25% of the films that I do are first or second time filmmakers, because I think it's very important that they get the room to try things out. Quite often they're quite experimental films, so they're more geared towards late night than prime time. But for me, it's very important to keep on getting new talent and not just work with the old people.
Is that a requirement, or is that...
No, it's a requirement I gave myself.
Oh, okay.
But also, you need to start somewhere, right? So for me, that's very important. And then experimental films are very important for me. So in form and style, if it's animation or musical, or again, looking for the boundaries of what you can do with a documentary, I think that's very important too. That's also usually more late night stuff. And then I do about 25% international documentaries, and I don't have any Dutch requirement for that. They just come from all around the world. And in that slot, I do tend to take more of the cinematic documentaries. We have a cinematic release first, or travel the festivals, and then, you can finally see it on television. Even
what kind of films are they? I know it was Queen of Versailles you were involved.
Well, yeah, the Queen of Versailles, or Kings of Pastry, or Armadillo, these kind of films. Or I should talk to my English audience as well. We do films from Brian Hill and Jerry Rothel, and they've been doing very well for us as well. And then there's a few Dutch cinema films as well. Of course, I think that's really important that we do that. But I think the whole distribution system between cinema, DVD release, TV, and VOD is so completely screwed that we really have to rethink on how you can make that distribution better. Mm-hmm. And for us in the Netherlands, we have HBO and Netflix, which means that we really need to compete with them now, and that we need to be in earlier and have signed contracts, because otherwise these films might sell when they're done for 1 million to Netflix, and then we won't have them. So we need to be there earlier. So I'm doing even more international co-productions now.
Well, they're not taking so many documentaries that you have to worry about.
Well, they took a few that we really wanted to have, and we're talking about forever already. So yes, we're pissed off.
Like what?
The Square, for example.
Okay. Well, that's the one example. I mean, you have another one?
Oh, yeah, I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Pussy Riot, for example, HBO. For us, that's really important now as well, yeah.
So Pussy Riot, for example, was a global deal, or?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Questions for Barbara?
No, I'm so clear, they don't.
No one wants to know? Okay.
No.
Here's one. No, microphone, please.
What lengths of films do you commission?
usually we tend to say 55 minutes because all the international slots are somewhere between 52 and 58. So we thought if we're in the middle, then we're always safe. It also means in television terms that we can repeat it easier because there's more 1 hour slots to repeat. But we have primetime slots of feature length as well, a few. And these would really be for the sort of like Imposter, Searching for Sugar Man kind of films. And late night, we can do whatever we want. We can show 3-hour films if we want. And it's quite funny, because we did at one point show 24-hour Berlin at our digital channel, and there was a glitch at 3 o'clock in the night, and we thought that nobody would notice. They did. And that's interesting, so yeah, no, we can show, but not shorter lengths than that.
Okay. One more question.
What, do you do all genres, or is it just sort of cinematic docs? Do you do current affairs, investigations? And also, can everyone say if they fully fund or only co-produce?
Well, no, I don't acquire. And I do fully fund in-house, but not. Yeah, sometimes I do with independent filmmakers, but hardly. So I wouldn't sort of put that door open now, because it's not the case. It's very exceptional. What else did you ask? Oh, the genres. No, it's more. I mean, no, I would say, like, for example, I saw this fantastic film yesterday called 1971. I don't know if you've seen it, but I think that says something about the NSA now. It has some sort of current reference, so that would make sense for me to do that. But I wouldn't do a film about the NSA. So no, not wildlife genres and I mean science, we do science, but more in a human way. So for example, we did Particle Fever that aired, that was shown here last year, but that's really about the scientists and how they do their science and what it meant for them, than really about the actual science. So it's more about the human perspective on life.
Okay. Tomoko, 10 years ago it was quite difficult to get a film co-produced by NHK. Now you're becoming like a real active co-producer, and you're doing a lot of films. So what changed?
Well, I don't really know, because I don't know about 10 years ago.
Since you're here, yeah. So.
Well, 10 years ago, NHK had a far bigger budget than we do now. So obviously, I think we commissioned 100% more than we do now. Because the budget is shrinking, obviously we have to co-produce. I think that would be one of the reasons. Yeah.
That's a pretty clear reason. Is there another reason, or is it more like
no,
NHK is also opening up a little bit? Or
well,
I mean,
yes. That means that we need to sort of reach out more than we used to for co-production. So we are sort of slowly growing. The section where we deal with international co-production is slowly growing, and so we're kind of trying to pave the way a little bit more as we go, and have more opportunities to do international co-production.
So if you do international co-production, you have to deal with different styles and different filmmakers around the world. And how does that work?
Well, basically we have 2 slots, which is completely dedicated to international films. So one is a current affair slot on our satellite channel, and we have another one on our terrestrial educational channel. The satellite channel, it's a 4-slot per week called the NHK World Documentary. So we try to put together 4 films under one subject each week. And we acquire about 90 hours, and we co-produce something like 10 to 15 hours per year. And the terrestrial educational channel is a 44-minute family viewing strand, where it's more for children. So they tend to do wildlife, ancient history, space, dinosaurs for families, for children and families.
Well, let's talk about the real documentaries. You have to adapt them for your audience, or you can just show them the way they are. Did you? You always need a Japanese narration, I guess.
Yes, of course the language versioning is a must. We have to either voiceover or subtitle. The terrestrial one is for children, so it's 100% voiceovered. But other than that, because these two strands are for our audience to get a chance to to watch documentaries that are produced and broadcast outside of Japan, for that reason we try not to do a lot of editorial changes. So it's basically the international version, except that we have to adapt the length a little bit. But other than that, we don't do a lot of changing to it, even if it's a co-production. Sometimes when we do a co-production, not for that strand, but for a special strand, if it's an ad hoc special program, then those will be a project that we think that we have to do a lot of adaptation to add more of the Japanese content, for example, or make it more understandable for our Japanese audience. So in that cases, we do a lot of re-editing.
And when how do you choose the co-production? They have to be related to events, or?
First of all, it has to have a strong connection, topic-wise, or topic-wise. Yes, I would say that. Right. As a content to the Japanese society, or either have a very strong Japanese aspect to it. For example, part of the documentary filmed inside Japan, or something like that. Other than that, another reason for us to do a co-production would be a film being shot in a place where it's extremely difficult for a Japanese filmmaker to access. So those will be another. This will be another.
Can
reason.
you be more specific? I mean, what would that be?
We recently did a co-production on Return to Homs. It's at this festival. It was shot inside Homs during the siege. So that was
Syria.
In Syria. Yeah. We did a co-production with you, the Battle for Rio. A crew inside the favela, inside the very deep part of favela, which would be very difficult for a Japanese filmmaker to go. So that would be a big reason for a co-production.
You want to show something, or?
Yes, I brought a clip, and it's a documentary film called Deadly Depth. It's about chemical weapons that were dumped into the sea after the Second World War, and it's leaking. And because Japan did produce a lot of chemical weapons during that period, and because a company in Japan has the technology to solve, to bring up the chemical weapons and make it harmless. So there's a company who's where they're doing that all over the world. So it had a strong Japanese element in the film. So that's why we did it. So maybe I brought a bit of the beginning, and then you'll see the Japanese element in the film.
Okay. Can you run this? Thank
you. Time bombs are ticking under the sea. 1 million tons of unused chemical weapons lie on seabeds all over the world, and their contents are leaking. This is an unknown story that cutting-edge science and newly declassified documents are now bringing to light.
Mentre si salpava le reti, gli veniva attaccato alle reti un liquido marrone scuro e che puzzava, una puzza strana, un odore strano, mai sentito. Poi subito dopo, quando abbiamo finito di salpare le reti, questa puzza dava così fastidio da toglierti il respiro. Poi dopo un po', sono svenuto, non ricordo più niente. Gli incidenti avvenuti, dei pescatori che hanno avuto contatto con queste sostanze, con queste bombe, che hanno ritrovato nelle reti rastracee, Quelli certificati saranno un 250, ma quelli non certificati sono molto di più.
Imperial Japan produced large quantities of weapons containing mustard gas and lewisite in the 1930s. They used them against civilians during the invasion of Manchuria in 1937, killing thousands. Poison gases were produced here at Okunoshima Island. The work was so secret the island was removed from Japanese maps during World War II.
いうことですが、昭和21年の春5月から6月頃に米軍が来てGHQ が来ましてそこに残っているタンクの中のものをドラム缶に全部移して、上陸用舟艇に2隻に詰めましてそれをそのまんま土佐の沖に2隻船ごと沈めたと。
The bombs in the Kanda port lie just 10 meters deep, and the Japanese government negotiated a contract with Kobelco, a giant steel corporation, to clear the weapons and destroy them.
核弾を処理するために独自に開発したダヴィンチシステムです。で、具体的には容器の中に化学弾と爆薬を一緒に入れて真空の状態にして爆破処理します。で、爆破の時にですね、やはり爆破時の超高圧、超高温の状態を瞬間のエネルギーで化学剤の分子構造を破壊し、
Was that a Japanese production or was it?
It's a French production, and so I just put together two parts of it. So the whole thing was more from the Baltic Sea to Italy and the US, and of course Japan. So it was originally pitched to us by a French company. And it was at Arte, I think it was on Arte, and we jumped in as a co-producer because there was this Japanese element. So NHK and NHK Enterprises actually did the research and the filming in Japan, and we collaborated with the French company in the editing.
Okay. Questions for Tomoko? No one has a project with Japanese connections? Okay. Well, Catherine, Passionate Eye. What is Passionate Eye, and how many films you're doing a year, and how do you select the documentaries you show on your channel?
Well, the Passionate Eye is the longest running international showcase of documentaries in Canada. It's been on the air now for 23 years, and it's broadcast on one of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's 3 channels. There's the CBC main channel, which has 2 documentary strands, one called Doc Zone, the other The Nature of Things. Most of those are films that are commissioned with Canadian independent producers, although the Nature of Things in particular does do some treaty co-productions. The second CBC channel is called CBC News Network, and it specializes in news, current affairs, and documentaries. And that's the channel on which the Passionate Eye is broadcast. And the CBC also has a third online digital channel called Documentary. And there are many examples where the Passionate Eye and Documentary will co-buy or get involved together in an international pre-sale. And a very recent example of that is one that was pitched at Hot Docs called Putin's #1 Enemy. That is a roast beef production with Sarah McCarthy and Mike Werner from the UK. So the Passionate Eye is primarily dealing with issue-driven controversial, contemporary, and very topical stories from around the world. We also occasionally show some big historical documentaries, particularly when I can tie them to an anniversary or when my crystal ball will find some topical link that makes them seem relevant to the Canadian audience or makes them seem very current. And we also show some, fast turnaround current affairs. A good example of that was produced by ITN here in the UK on Malaysia, The Mystery of Malaysia, Flight 370, which was turned around in 2 weeks, and they did a remarkable job given how quickly that film was turned around, and we were able to buy it and put it on the air within 48 hours of its completion. And we also, the Passionate Eye's bread and butter over the years has been the big festival doc, the big theatrical doc that does the rounds and allows me as the programmer and the commissioning editor and the curator to put together films that may not fall under the sort of the brand of the station, which is news and current affairs, but has really helped reinforce the brand of the Passionate Eye. And if I were to find a UK description, it's somewhere between Storyville, where you're seeing your longer feature-length, more character-driven documentaries, but we also show films that would appear on This World or Dispatches. And in the US, I would say it's a combination or between Frontline on PBS and POV. So I have a lot of flexibility. We're on Saturday and Sunday nights at 10 p.m. And I have flexibility in length, so everything from a commercial 1 hour to a theatrical feature. And what I've done is we have a promo reel that will show you excerpts from some of the films that aired on the Passionate Eye this season, some of which you'll be very familiar with because they've shown elsewhere around the world. But it'll give you a sense of the diversity that we can show. And I just have to say, in defense of North Americans, or in particular Canadians, we've shown a lot of films about sex. We have no problems talking about sex on the air. We have some difficulty showing sex. In fact, we have a lot of difficulty showing sex, but talking, no problem. And there was one film called Still Doing It, which reminded me a little bit of Barbara's film that aired quite recently. So anyway, if we can show our promo reel, that'd be great.
Hunted in Russia, a shocking expose of homophobic violence.
The hunting season is open, and we are the hunted.
For the first time, a TV crew infiltrates a vigilante group and reveals the terrifying truth.
This is Russia. This is hell for homosexuals.
Who's the champ of the world?
Behind the swagger.
Well, I'm the greatest, and I'm knocking out all bums. And if you get too smart, I'll knock you out.
Beyond the ring. Muhammad Ali fought his toughest battle.
Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
There's one hell of a lot of difference in fighting in the ring and going to war in Vietnam.
I'm just about broke. I'm not allowed to work here now in America. I'm not allowed to leave America.
He actually stood up and did what a Muslim would do. And that took a lot of balls.
What would happen if a tsunami hit the east coast of North America?
Some would argue that this is a catastrophe waiting to happen.
Tens of thousands of people are feared dead and hundreds of thousands are still missing following the worst natural disaster in history.
Using CGI simulations, scientists predict how a volcanic eruption could trigger the biggest wave ever.
You're talking about more than 2 Empire State Buildings on top of one another.
We might have 2 or 3 hours notice. The question is, what can you do in 2 or 3 hours? And the answer is not much.
Wouldn't it be exciting to communicate with a chimp? So why not teach him sign language?
What happens when a baby chimp is raised like a human?
There was no family discussion. It was just, oh, we're having a chimp.
Everything was about treating him like a human being. He liked alcohol. He loved driving fast in cars. I breastfed him for a couple of months. It seemed completely natural.
But big egos and human power struggles didn't always serve Nim's best interests.
I had never regarded him as a child. I regarded him as a scientific project.
We did a huge disservice to that soul.
The Catholic Church of the 21st century is a global financial power. Today, as always, the Church's riches bring controversy. I'm undertaking an investigation into the heart of the Church's finances.
When it comes to money, this is one of the sloppiest and most decentralized organizations on earth. The flip side of that is, of course, it opens the door to incredibly sloppy procedures and the possibility for real corruption.
Why is the Catholic Church plagued by financial scandal? Can the Church reconcile its money with its morals?
So 3 out of those 5 documentaries were UK productions. One was Italian and the other was American from Kartemquin, which also aired on PBS. And we were also involved in Christoph's Battle for Rio, which aired on Sunday night in Canada. So, as I say, we like films that are topical. We particularly like films that are controversial. And we like to stir up the pot and like Barbara, get people talking, but we like to create debate and to stimulate controversy. So,
how early on can you get involved in films, and what's the average?
Well, I would say that at this stage, about 50% are pre-sales, 50% are acquisitions. And because of the fact that Canada lives in the shadow of a very big neighbor that has much deeper pockets than we do, it means that I often have to get in at an earlier stage before all the North American rights have been bought by a U.S. broadcaster. So it means that I travel a lot. You know, I'm trying to meet with you and get to you at an earlier stage, and I encourage you that before you do your U.S. deal, if you think it might be something that would be of interest to the CBC, then talk to us, because it's often possible to carve out a tiny little window. And it's not a huge amount of money, but it's extra money, and it's often money that can help you get to that next stage, you know, do the extra edit, the extra shoot, and we can help create some momentum for a project. So that's what I bring to the table. Is I bring editorial experience, I bring some money at an opportune time, and I can help create some momentum. And I think that the Passionate Eye has a really good brand name, both nationally and internationally. So, you know, if we're on board, someone else will take a second look at your project.
And extremely easy to deal with.
That's true, actually. That's also how we sort of vet out projects, by asking each other, like, are you involved in this one? Because it helps. It helps to know that people that are doing sort of similar things that you are doing are involved. So that's also important, that you can start a posse.
And the other thing that we're also, I am encouraging people to do is to, if you have non-English interviews, to consider dubbing. And I know this is a very controversial subject in the documentary community, but we're really trying to develop a younger audience. And in Canada, research has shown that 60% of Canadian television viewers go online while they're watching television. And I don't know about you, but if I'm looking at my BlackBerry, I can't watch subtitles and double task at the same time. So if I'm double tasking, imagine what a younger audience is doing. And so if you want to bring that younger audience to your film, I think it's just something that you have to consider. Some broadcasters do it without I mean, you won't get a film on their channel unless it's dubbed in their language. So I'm just encouraging you as UK independent producers to consider dubbing non-English interviews for the international marketplace and for your own marketplace too. It really makes a difference in drawing in that younger audience.
Questions? So you keep your questions for the end. Okay, good. John, SBS Australia. Catherine and Barbara, they mentioned that, well, it's a question that producers have very often. I mean, when you propose a film, does it have to be linked to an event or to an anniversary? Is that something that you would say that it's the case also for SBS, or?
No, but it helps. But I mean, the difficulty about working with SBS, I think more so than anyone else here, is we have to have some sort of Australian content. There has to be some sort of Australian story element.
Really?
To commission, absolutely.
Okay. So, for example.
I mean, I can explain why.
Is it for all pre-sales that you're doing, or is it only for co-productions, or?
For commissioned documentaries. Okay. I mean, like we're a very small public service broadcaster. We have a particular charter which our purpose is to explore and promote cultural diversity, in particular multicultural diversity. 95% of our documentaries are acquisitions, because we're small, we don't have much money. We commission about 35, 40 hours a year. Out of that, 8 to 10 hours are probably international co-productions. Now, we can only commission an Australian company, production company. So any international companies have to form a business relationship with an Australian company. But having said that, that Australian company brings a lot of money to the table, because there's a tax break, and there is funding from Screen Australia, and there is our licence fee. Now that could be $500,000 Australian dollars. So that's not insignificant.
So for many years, you always had someone in London looking over your productions, maybe from Europe or from the rest of the world. So how does that work?
Well, that was for pre-sale acquisitions, which is different than.
But we're talking about the same slots, or not?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
well,
no. We don't. I mean, like,
no.
Explain. It's interesting, you know, like Mark going through all his slots. We don't commission for slots, so because we're so small, we're commissioning for ideas that we think can cut through and reach an audience. I'll give you an example of that. You know, one of our biggest international co-productions last year was JFK, The Smoking Gun, which was a Discovery Canada, Reels USA, and that got one of the highest audiences that we've ever had in our history. It's like over 1 million. Why am I saying that? Am I answering your question? I'm not sure. Is it?
Continue. I mean,
okay.
Why? So what do you think was the reason? Because it was JFK and it was linked to an anniversary.
It goes back to your first. Yeah, it was an anniversary. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it had, the key thing for us, it had an Australian ex-detective who had what he claimed was a new theory about the JFK assassination. So that's why it worked for us, because it had an Australian detective. But there's absolutely no other Australian content. But otherwise, it's difficult for us to justify it as an acquisition or a commission. If it didn't have that, then it becomes an acquisition.
Catherine, she mentioned that she's pretty much curating her strand, which is whatever you think you put in. That's what it is at the end. I mean, there's a Russian film, an American film, and I think you choose, like for every season, you choose something that makes sense as an ensemble, or.
No, I mean,
and I wonder how that works for SBS, because you have so many different people then buying things for the same slots. That's probably not the same kind of commissioning work, no?
I anticipate what are going to be the big events that are coming up in the year, and I follow the work of filmmakers who I know And as I say, I travel to a lot of these festivals. And so you're trying to anticipate both what's going to be topical and of interest. And I make jokes about my crystal ball, but it's amazing the number of times you'll program something and it'll be in the news. And that film's been in production for 2 years, but suddenly it seems really hot and very topical. And so it's a combination of luck, and I think over the years you just have, you develop good instinct. And I'm lucky that I do get to curate, and but your situation is different to some extent.
Yeah. I don't commission for slots. I think acquisitions absolutely is buying for slots, but I'm sort of commissioning for ideas that as I said before, really do have the potential to sort of cut through and create a bit of noise, to be honest, because that's the only way we can actually get ourselves noticed.
And one thing that helps with Strands is what actually commissioning editors are looking for. So how do we know what you're looking for? Let's say science and history is a really good subject that we get a lot of international co-productions from. There was one that went out last night on the BBC, Into the Inferno, I think it was called. That was a co-production with Dragonfly and an Australian company. We've got our version of that. It was about New South Wales fires, bushfires in New South Wales. That's why it worked for us. We've got another one, a 90-minute doc about the tsunami, Boxing Day tsunami. I've got another anniversary coming up. That's got some Australian characters in it. Now, that should give you an example of the sort of things that work for us. With Arte, we do a lot in science. There's a lot of science co-pros that we do. But I could say, all right, 90 minutes, it goes out on 8:30 on a Sunday, but if we'll find a slot for it if we think it can reach an audience. I think our schedule is one of the most flexible, I think, of everyone here. So how does the scheduling work then? You have an influence on the scheduling, or?
No, I don't. No, I'm only a little commissioning editor. I don't.
Does any one of you have influence on scheduling? You have?
Well, I always put in my motivations, and usually they say, yeah, great idea, let's do that. It's not often that they, especially if you do kind of anniversary things, or, for example, we're doing this Finnish film that we picked up here as well, Once I Dreamt of Life, which is about suicide, and it's a very difficult subject, but we decided with about 8 European broadcasters to all air it in the same week, so you can actually start a sort of European discussion on suicide prevention. And that, they of course they understand it. I think, yeah, let's join in and do that too.
I'm very lucky that I'm totally in charge of my slots. So I create the schedule, and part of how I'm able to appear topical is that I program only 3 weeks out. So it puts a lot of pressure on the system, but I don't lock my schedule until 3 weeks before we go to air. So that means I can move things around, or I can anticipate when something's going to be, really newsworthy.
Well, Mark is dreaming about that.
Yeah, we program 8 to 10 weeks out, and we have a lot of conversations with the programming people, but they have the last word. So we'll commission a film with an idea of where it should go, but sometimes when the programming people look at it, they say we want to put it somewhere else. And sometimes there are arguments that we win, and sometimes there are arguments that we don't win.
John, you want to show something?
It's a clip of, I think it's not an international co-production, but it really says something about what SBS stands for. It's from a series called Go Back to Where You Came From, and I'm showing it partly because we've just commissioned Series 3. This Series 1 won a Golden Rose, Series 2 won an International Emmy, and it's actually an illustration of the sort of international social issue, contemporary factual space that I would dearly love to find a co-pro idea in. So this is from Series 2.
Okay.
Refugees, asylum seekers, boat people. Issues that continue to divide a nation.
Go to hell with your refugees!
These are the lives of the people we are playing with.
Another asylum seeker boat has capsized, but it's unclear how many people have perished.
There is nothing as harsh as dying on the sea.
But what do we know of those who risk life and limb to reach our shores? Now, 6 prominent Australians have agreed to take part in a unique, life-changing experiment.
35,000 people and no water. That's terrible.
For 3 weeks, they will live the life of a refugee.
These poor people. Look at this. Oh, God.
There's rock singer and aspiring politician, Angry Anderson.
Stick your illegals up your ass.
Writer and controversial comedian, Catherine Devaney.
The slimy way that John Howard and people like Peter Reith demonised these people.
And former Defence Minister himself, Peter Reith.
No one can dispute we did stop the boats.
Radio shock jock, Michael Smith.
We are being gamed by queue jumpers. That is bastardry and vandalism of this nation on a scale that it's difficult to put into words.
Former Commonwealth Ombudsman, Alan Asher.
They are not boat people. They are people who come in boats. They are people.
And model and actor, Imogen Bailey.
I don't blame any Australian that says we don't want the boat people here, because the bloody media is driving them to that opinion.
Overseeing this bold experiment is refugee expert Dr. David Corlett.
Last time, 6 ordinary Australians embarked on this life-changing refugee journey. This time, you're all high-profile public figures, and you represent different, often opposing sides to the national debate about asylum seekers. The goal is to take this critical discussion to a whole new level.
Join these 6 prominent Australians on one of the most dangerous refugee journeys imaginable.
Don't point it at me, thanks.
We are minutes away from fucking huge waves.
Over the next 3 nights, their views will be deeply challenged.
He's got nobody. How can that happen, you know?
They shouldn't have to live like that. If this happens once again, I can tell you I will be on the next plane.
And they will challenge each other.
It's no good you going around telling me that I got blood on my hands.
I'm sorry, that's
it's your truth.
I disagree. Michael drives me insane.
Australia should do more.
Get fucked.
You're still disregarding me.
Well, I'm
You'll
not in the
disregard
education
me.
business, sorry.
Sorry.
What a shame.
Tonight, their confronting journey begins.
I'm telling the truth. You have no respect for me. You can go and stay hotel.
And they'll soon find themselves in 2 of the most dangerous cities on Earth.
If I go down, please film it.
This is literally hell.
I feel so embarrassed to be an Australian.
Is this an approach that for prime time? Is this a prime time program on SBS or?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, 8:30. It was stripped Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so we turned it into an event.
And they all have this kind of real TV approach, or do your prime times, or is this just one example that you?
It's an example of, when we say real TV, you mean reality TV?
Reality TV, yeah.
I mean, it's not reality TV, but it's using some of the devices to get an audience, because part of our purpose is to create national discussions around subjects which are close to our charter. And refugees and asylum seekers is a huge issue in Australia, and that series got the highest audience for any commissioned documentary for factual in SBS's history. And the reason, and there's a good reason for that, is because we use the devices that a younger audience were familiar with. And we're using that approach now to explore other social issues with other sorts of factual series.
Okay. Questions for John? Yes, one question.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Claire Sturgis. I'm a British filmmaker. I had a couple of TV 1 hours picked up by ABC Australia for a 9:30 p.m. Friday night slot called Sex on Fridays. I'm just wondering what your relationship with ABC is and who you see as the main competition within Australia.
The ABC are our big brother, the big public service broadcaster. I mean, on a personal level, I know ABC commissioning editors well, but I would say that if it feels as though it fits on the ABC, then we wouldn't commission it.
Who's your main competition then?
Well, it would be the ABC, to be honest. I mean, like in terms of serious documentary and factual, there's no other network that commissions documentaries. But it's not really competition, because I think we both need each other.
What about competition for audience share then, for audience mind?
Well, it would be the ABC. Our core audience is the ABC's core audience. But when with series like Go Back to Where You Came From, or sort of the big things that really do punch through, we get the audience from the commercial networks as well, which is what we want.
Do you have online content to support it? How do you make the conversation a bit bigger than just telly?
All our big commissions have an online and social media element, especially with something like Go Back. The social media component was really, really important. So it was but it was created internally by SBS Online.
In terms of international co-productions, do you offer similar kind of advice and guidance for strategy within different territories, or do you stick to just Australia with the social side of things?
In the social side of, in social media?
Creating conversations that go beyond one-off TV broadcast. So maybe I should rephrase the question. When you're working with other countries for co-productions, do you just think about your Australian conversation, or do you tie in with a bigger conversation elsewhere?
We'd love to find a project where we could do that. We haven't, but at the moment with the international co-pros, and I'm thinking of sort of science ones we do with the Smithsonian, which we did a 3-part series. That was very much, the online content was tailored for the Australian audience, because they go out at different times. You know, sometimes actually the US version has a different title. So.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you for all these questions. Then, Donald, would you describe yourself more a commissioning editor or a programmer?
I'm a broadcaster.
You're a broadcaster.
I'm a broadcaster in the sense, so...
I mean, we cannot explain PBS in 5 minutes. It takes another panel or a day to do that. So how do you describe, I mean, can you describe the job?
Let me give it a shot a bit.
Okay, good.
So PBS is the public service broadcaster in the United States. PBS, I don't want you running out of the room because it can be a little cumbersome, but there are about 300 stations in the United States that were publicly owned. They were owned by colleges and universities, owned by states, and they were around back in the 60s. And so someone decided, why not put these stations together, let them let them aggregate their money, and Congress, the United States Congress, formed during the Public Broadcasting Act of 1968, 69, or somewhere around there. The Public Broadcasting Act created something called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is CPB, which then formed PBS. So PBS is the closest thing to a network that you can think of, but we're not a network because we really are owned and operated by those 300 stations that we support in their prime time. PBS actually produces and airs children's programs during the day, and then we go away. And then we come back at 7 o'clock for a news strand, and then we're on the air at 8 o'clock. So my job is that I'm the vice president of programming in the strands of art, music, performance programs, and also we have two series that are independent series called Independent Lens, and Muhammad Ali actually was part of Independent Lens, and POV. And these are point of view films. In many cases, they are films that come to us where the filmmaker really is a part of social change. Our independent films, we have like 27 slots for Independent Lens. We have about 17 slots for POV, and they air on Monday nights at 10 o'clock. And then we have a series called Frontline, which is our huge, massive investigative series, which is on at 10 o'clock. And they've all been on the air for over 20 years. But PBS is a variety service. And so I'm going to show you a clip, which is a promo clip that we shared with our stations. And this is kind of what we do, and this is kind of what we did last year. Drew.
We're going to share our knowledge, our curiosity. I'm Gwen Eichel. And I'm Judy Woodruff.
This is a crisis, and anybody who doesn't believe it is in denial.
Shut up!
Welcome to my world.
1, 2, 3, 4. Just because we're growing up. Hello, neighbor. Merry Christmas.
Welcome to Downton.
Hey, man.
PBS is a pretty badass station.
So that in essence shows kind of the breadth of PBS. So while I sit back and smile at the arts and the drama and the performance programs that we do, which there's a panel tomorrow or Wednesday that I'm actually sitting on about called Making Arts Mainstream. I also represent our independent films, our two independent lens and POV, and you know, I get to work with the arts. I mean, I see opera, I see classical music, but also I get to work with some of the best filmmakers in the world, you know, who go out and they have no money at times, and yet though, and it takes them, you know, 5 years to, you know, to do a film, and as they're putting together money for films, and we get to put them on PBS. I'm also just astounded, you know, when smaller independents, there are times when they will put their film on a credit card. They make it that way. And yet, though, they stick with it, and they never, ever give up, which is great. So I think for PBS, and I was listening, just trying to think some themes here, is that we were talking a little bit, and the other thing you should know about PBS is that our audience is plus 60. So when I get folks who say, you know what, I'm going to bring you a show for 35-year-olds, I say, no thanks. Because in essence, every time we try, the 35 years don't watch. And the 60-year-olds don't watch down. So we tend to program for adults. We tend to think our youngest audience is 40, as a matter of fact, and we go up from there. So when what you saw in some of those clips, you saw on Sunday nights, we do British programs. British programs meaning we do drama, and we do things that are British-centric, because Americans appear to have an amazing love affair with the Brits. I don't know why. But we do. And in essence, so we also produce and co-produce with probably as many British filmmakers and production companies as we do Americans. Tuesday nights, we have our Antiques Roadshow, which is it is our most popular show on PBS, and then we do a series called, and then we do POV and Independent Lens. Tuesdays, we do history meaning all kinds of history, whether it's world history, personal history. On Wednesdays, we do science and natural history. Forget Thursdays, we kind of repeat our schedule. Friday, we do arts and news and public affairs. Saturdays, we are dark because, again, PBS is a group of stations, and we let stations do what they want. We commission, we co-produce, and we acquire, and much of that, however, is done through our strands. So you end up having nature. Nature is our natural history strand, And they commission and co-produce with people like you, with filmmakers like you who are doing natural history programs. If you are a science producer, it's at our series Nova. It's been on the air for over 30 years. They are here, and they actually commission those series. We fund Nature, we fund Nova to a certain extent. They actually then go out and find their own money because, as you all know, how much these films cost. And also, they actually work on international scale. They co-produce with many of you, as a matter of fact.
Donald, if you want a program, can you commission it yourself, or do you have to find strategies to get it commissioned through the system?
No, it's a great question. We as a programming and editorial team at PBS commission ourselves. So I actually get to curate and commission 11 weeks of the year of an arts festival. So pretty much I have a certain budget for that, and I curate those 11 weeks of art and performance programs. But for the most part, we do commission. So there's no outside of PBS that we have to get approval for. But yet, though, for some of our bigger strands, like Masterpiece, which is our British drama, they pretty much select the films or dramas they'd like to air in collaboration with us, because we're the major funder. So anything we majorly fund, we actually work with the commissioners of that strand to bring to PBS, and we are very schedule driven. So when I had a filmmaker had a great film, as a matter of fact, that was 97 minutes long. The choices are, do you cut it to a 90-minute slot, which is 86:46, or do we fill the rest of the 20 minutes? What do you think we did? We cut it. And as it turned out, we had those kinds of arguments or discussions. But on the other hand, when we aired Sherlock in January, Sherlock was one of the highest, most watched dramas on PBS is around the world. And so instead of cutting the film, we commissioned three 23-minute behind-the-scenes documentaries on it. So we did let it go. So we can be flexible in that sense.
We have a little bit of a time problem, and I want to bring in Cynthia also. So you work for one of the younger channels in America, Al Jazeera America. How is that? The films you commission, documentaries, how are they different from what PBS is doing?
Well, first of all, we're about 9 months old. We're the newest member of the Al Jazeera Media Networks, which is the two mother channels. I call them mother channels, Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English. And then there's also Al Jazeera Documentary, which is another Arabic language channel. Then there's Al Jazeera Balkans and Al Jazeera Turkey, and now Al Jazeera America. So technically, we are a regional channel, although it's a very big region, the United States of America. We're only seen there. I think our biggest competitor really is probably CNN or MSNBC. We're a cable news channel that has an opportunity to bring some great programming in. So we have a documentary slot on Sunday night at 9 o'clock called Al Jazeera America Presents. And one of the ways it's very different is that within the strand, we're going to air, we commissioned about 6 tentpole docu-series. So, for example, one of the examples today, Joe Berlinger was here talking with David Courier from Sundance about a series that he created for us called The System, which is about a look at the American justice system and its flaws and where it's broken, with Joe kind of as our guide and our, technically, I wouldn't call him the host, but he's almost a character within the documentary, and that's an 8-part series that is actually airing right now on the channel. And so in between these docu-series, which again are big tent poles, we're going to either co-produce or acquire single documentaries. They could be documentaries that I've seen at festivals, feature docs. They could be made for television, that kind of thing. And that's what we're going to carefully curate in between. So
will you Can you do, I mean, Al Jazeera is like a world brand now, so
Yes.
we will be very soon in Holland too, and be another competitor for VPRO. No, I'm joking.
I was like, really? I didn't know that.
But can you do like deals as Al Jazeera, or is what you do really focused on America?
Well, the interesting thing is that as we try to build an audience in the United States, and as you can imagine, bringing Al Jazeera into the U.S. was a big deal, but we're trying to build an audience for Americans. It could be global issue or, domestic stories, but things that are going to resonate with the U.S. audience. And part of the way that we think of ourselves is that, yes, we're an American channel, but we see ourselves as we're Americans that are a part of the world rather than Americans apart from the world, whereas some of the other channels we don't want to say, but we think of ourselves as really a part of the world. So. Big difference.
And you have a real documentary approach. I mean, you work with people.
Why are you laughing, Donald? No.
No, you have a real documentary approach because you work with people like Steve James and Joe Berlinger. So people I would expect more on HBO or PBS.
And while we're a news channel, primarily a news channel, we're always going to be primarily a news channel. We see documentary as part of telling a story that we go very immersive, observational docs, or something like The System, which is somewhat formatted but tells really deep, immersive stories. We look at social experiment kinds of things. We had a series called Borderland, which was our first original series that looked at the relationship with the U.S.-Mexico border. Very immersive, very controversial. And one of the other ways, but we also look at very story-driven, character-driven. Characters and stories are primarily what we're looking for in that slot. We also have an opportunity, since we're a news channel, to leading up to the Sunday night premiere, to bring on the filmmakers, characters from the films, experts talking about the issues onto our nightly news shows, where they're really going to break out and unpack what these films are all about. It leads up to driving viewers to the broadcast, and it makes it more of event programming, and it's really worked for us in a big way. So.
Okay, now it's time for questions. We are rushing really. Sorry. She didn't have a clip. I knew that.
Clip, but one of our first co-production actually was Holy Money that we co-produced with CBC, and we're also on board with Putin's Number One Enemy about Bill Browder and with CBC as well. So those are two examples. We're doing another Alex Gibney series in the fall called Edge of 18, looking at 15 very diverse young kids leaving high school, on the precipice of becoming adults, and where they're going to. And another three-part series we're doing in the fall is called Midterms, with A.J. Schnack, who's a very prominent U.S. indie filmmaker, following several of the not only the primaries, but up to the elections and the midterms in the United States. So.
And you are pretty competitive now with all the channels like CNN Films and HBO.
I think everyone's very competitive in the U.S.
So that means you have the money to do that.
We've had a very generous budget from Doha. We're really grateful. I can't really talk about money, but you can come and I'm here till Wednesday. Come and talk to me and ask me any questions you want. But we're very closely aligned, of course, with Al Jazeera English, being that in the English language, and we do show some witness and people in power programming, particularly, and not only in our slot, but we have an afternoon 3 p.m. slot that actually rates extremely high.
There was a question here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I just wanted to say, pretty much on that topic, Al Jazeera English has got some great kind of back half hour, I think about 23-minute piece, sort of human interest stories they do, and as an observer rather than knowing the strategy, they seem to have always an Arabic or a Muslim connectivity for the choice of those stories. Do you share content with them at all? And
we do share a lot of content, especially with Al Jazeera English. However, we don't have half-hour slots, and our slot is actually our hour is 50 minutes. And actually, the stories don't have to be, coming from a lot of people, they pitch me constantly stories from the Middle East, stories from the Arabic world. That's not necessary at all. In fact, for me, working for the America Channel, I'd rather have a story an American story if possible, or, you know, a Muslim American story. It's really going to work for me, or any kind of American story. Good characters, issue-driven, that's what I'm looking for. But Al Jazeera, that's a good question, because Al Jazeera English has wonderful documentary strands. Witness, they do both half hours and hours. People in Power, half hours and hours, and they do commission and co-produce as well, and do some terrific stuff.
Okay, one more question, and then we have to wrap it up. Please, can you?
Jonathan Ossoff with Insight. Is there any space for African affairs left at all?
I'll tell you for PBS, then we would be looking at POV and Independent Lens, who both would take those topics on. And since we don't have we don't do one-off documentaries so much unless we talked about on this panel with anniversaries. So, you know, if you pull out your anniversary list of what's going on, if you think that you've got a program that you think might be having a big anniversary, sometimes we tie it with some of our other big shows. But I think POV, Independent Lens, and Frontline, to be quite honest with you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was terrific, and thank you for coming.